just wanted to make this recording of some of my favorite chapters of one of my favorite books, Watership Down. It is my favorite parts of the book, the ones that involve Cowslips Warren. Yeah. It starts out with chapter 13 of the book. Let us begin. Chapter 13, Hospitality. The corner of the opposite wood turned out to be an acute point. Beyond it, the ditch and trees curved back again in a re-entrant, so that the field formed a bay with a bank running all the way round. It was evident now why Cowslip, when he left them, had gone among the trees. He had simply run in a direct line from their holes to his own, passing on his way through the narrow strip of woodland that lay between. Indeed, as Hazel turned the point and stopped to look about him, he could see the place where Cowslip must have come out. A clear rabbit track led from the bracken, under the fence and into the field. In the bank on the further side of the bay, the rabbit holes were plain to see, showing dark and distinct in the bare ground. It was as conspicuous a warren as could well be imagined. "Sky above us," said Bigwig. "Every living creature for miles must know that's there. Look at all the tracks in the grass, too. Do you think they sing in the morning like the thrushes?" "Perhaps they're too secure to bother about concealing themselves," said Blackberry. After all, the home warren was fairly plain to see seen. "Yes, but not like that. A couple of Hilrududu could go down some of those holes." "So could I," said Dandelion. "I'm getting dreadfully wet." As they approached, a big rabbit appeared over the edge of the ditch, looked at them quickly, and vanished into the bank. A few moments later, two others came out and waited for them. They, too, were sleek and unusually large. "A rabbit called Cowslip offered us shelter here," said Hazel. "Perhaps you know that he came to see us?" Both rabbits together made a curious dancing movement of the head and front paws. Apart from sniffing, as Hazel and Cowslip had done when they met, formal gestures, except between mating rabbits, were unknown to Hazel and his companions. They felt mystified and slightly ill at ease. The dancers paused, evidently waiting for some acknowledgement or reciprocal gesture, but there was none. "Cowslip is in the great Borough," said one of them at length. "Would you like to follow us there?" "How many of us?" asked Ezel. "Why, all of you," answered the other, surprised. "You don't want to stay out in the rain, do you?" Hazel had supposed that he and one or two of his comrades would be taken to see the chief rabbit, who would probably not be Cowslip, since Cowslip had come to see them unattended, in his burrow, after which they would all be given different places to go to. It was this separation of which he had been afraid. He now realized with astonishment that there was apparently a part of the warren underground which was big enough to contain all of them together. He felt so curious to visit it that he did not stop to make any detailed arrangements about the order in which they should go down. However, he put Pipkin immediately behind him. "It'll warm his little heart for once," he thought, "and if the leaders do get attacked, I suppose we can spare him easier than some." Bigwig had asked to bring up the rear. "If there's any trouble, get out of it," he said, "and take as many as you can with you." Then he followed their guides into one of the holes in the bank. The run was broad, smooth, and dry. It was obviously a highway, for other runs branched off in all directions. The rapids in front went fast, and Hazel had little time to sniff about as he followed. Suddenly he checked. He had come into an open place. His whiskers could feel no earth in front, and none was near his sides. There was a good deal of air ahead of him. He could feel it moving, and there was considerable space above his head. Also, there were several rabbits near him. It had not occurred to him that there would be a place underground where he would be exposed on 3 sides. He backed quickly and felt Pipkin at his tail. "What a fool I was," he thought. "Why didn't I put Silver there?" At this moment he heard Cowslip speaking. He jumped, for he could tell that he was some way away. The size of the place must be immense. "Is that you, Hazel?" said Cowslip. "You're welcome, and so are your friends. We're glad you've come." No human beings, except the courageous and experienced blind, are able to sense much in a strange place where they cannot see. But with rabbits, it is otherwise. They spend half their lives underground in darkness or near darkness, and touch, smell, and hearing convey as much or more to them as sight. Hazel now had the clearest knowledge of where he was. He would have recognized the place if he had left at once and come back 6 months later. He was at one end of the largest burrow he had ever been in, sandy, warm, and dry, with a hard, bare floor. There were several tree roots running across the roof, and it was these that supported the unusual span. There was a great number of rabbits in the place, many more than he was bringing. All had the same rich, opulent smell as Cowslip. Cowslip himself was at the other end of the hall, and Hazel realized that he was waiting for him to reply. His own companions were still coming out of the entrance burrow one by one, and there was a good deal of scrabbling and shuffling. He wondered if he ought to be very formal, whether or not he could call himself a chief rabbit. He had had no experience of this sort of thing. The Furrow would no doubt have risen to the occasion perfectly. He did not want to appear at a loss or to let his followers down. He decided it would be best to be plain and friendly. After all, there would be plenty of time, as they settled down in the warren, to show these strangers that they were as good as themselves without risking trouble by putting on airs at the start. "We're glad to be out of the bad weather," he said. "We're like all rabbits, happiest in a crowd. When you came over to see us in the field, Cowslip, you said your warren wasn't large, but judging by the holes we saw along the bank, it must be what we reckon a fine big one." As he finished, he sensed that Bigwig had just entered the hall, and knew that they were all together again. The stranger rabbit seemed slightly disconcerted by his little speech, and he felt that for some reason or other he had not struck the right note in complimenting them on their numbers. Perhaps there were not very many of them after all? Had there been disease? There was no smell or sign of it. These were the biggest and healthiest rabbits he had ever met. Perhaps their fidgeting and silence had nothing to do with what he had said. Perhaps it was simply that he had not spoken very well, being new to it, and they felt that he was not up to their fine ways. Never mind, he thought. After last night, I'm sure of my own lot. We wouldn't be here at all if I weren't as handy in a pinch. These other fellows will just have to get to know us. They don't seem to dislike us anyway. There were no more speeches. Rabbits have their own conventions and formalities, but these are few and short by human standards. If Hazel had been a human being, he would have been expected to introduce his companions one by one, and no doubt each would have been taken in charge as a guest by one of their hosts. In the great borough, however, things happened differently. The rabbits mingled naturally. They did not talk for talking's sake, in the artificial manner that human beings, and sometimes even their dogs and cats do. But this did not mean that they were not communicating, merely that they were not communicating by talking. All over the borough, both the newcomers and those who were at home were accustoming themselves to each other in their own way and their own time, getting to know what the strangers smelled like, how they moved, how they breathed, how they scratched, the feel of their rhythms and pulses. These were their topics and subjects of discussion, carried on without the need of speech. To a greater extent than a human in a similar gathering, each rabbit, as he pursued his own fragment, was sensitive to the trend of the whole. After a time, all knew that the concourse was not going to turn sour or break up a fight. Just as a battle begins in a state of equilibrium between the two sides, which gradually alters one way or the other until it is clear that the balance has tilted so far that the issue can no longer be in doubt, so this gathering of rabbits in the dark, beginning with hesitant approaches, silences, pauses, movements, crouching side by side, and all manner of tentative appraisals, slowly moved like a hemisphere of a world into summer to a warmer, brighter region of mutual liking and approval, until all felt sure that they had nothing to fear. Pipkin, some way away from Hazel, crouched at his ease between two huge rabbits who could have broken his back in a second, while Buckthorn and Cowslip started a playful scuffle, nipping at each other like kittens and then breaking off to comb their ears in a comical pretense of sudden gravity. Only Fibre sat alone and apart. He seemed either ill or very much depressed, and the strangers avoided him instinctively. The knowledge that the gathering was safely round the corner came to Hazel in the form of a recollection of Silver's head and paws breaking through gravel. At once he felt warm and relaxed. He had already crossed the whole length of the hall and was pressed close to two rabbits, a buck and a doe, each of whom was fully as large as Cowslip. When both together took a few slow hops down one of the runs nearby, Hazel followed, and little by little they all three moved out of the hall. They came to a smaller burrow, deeper underground. Evidently this belonged to the couple, for they settled down as though at home, and made no objection when Hazel did the same. Here, while the mood of the great hall slowly passed from them, all three were silent for a time. "Is Cowslip the chief rabbit?" asked Hazel at length. The other replied with a question. "Are you called Chief Rabbit?" Hazel found this awkward to answer. If he replied that he was, his new friends might address him so far in the future, and he could not imagine what Bigwig and Silver would have to say about that. As usual, he fell back on plain honesty. "We're only a few," he said. "We left our warren in a hurry to escape from bad things. Most stayed behind, and the chief rabbit was one of them. I've been trying to leave my friends, but I don't know whether they care to hear me called Chief Rabbit." "That'll make him ask a few questions," he thought. "Why did you leave? Why didn't the rest come? What were you afraid of? And whatever am I going to say?" When the other rabbits spoke, however, it was clear that either he had no interest in what Hazel had said, or else he had some other reason for not questioning him. "We don't call anyone Chief Rabbit," he said. "It was Cowslip's idea to go and see you this afternoon, so he was the one who went." "But who decides what to do about Ezel, and digging and sending scouting parties and so on?" "Oh, we never do anything like that. Ezel'll keep away from here. There was a humbug last winter, but the man who comes through the fields, he shot it with his gun." Hazel stared. "But men won't shoot a humbug." "Well, he killed this one anyway. He kills owls too. We never dig. No one's dug in my lifetime. A lot of the burrows are lying empty, you know. Rats live in one part, but the man kills them as well when he can. We don't need expeditions. There's better food here than anywhere else. Your friends will be happy living here." But he himself did not sound particularly happy, and once again Hazel felt oddly perplexed. "Where does the man—" he began, but he was interrupted. "I'm called Strawberry. This is my doe, Neildrahane. Some of the best empty burrows are quite close. I'll show you, in case your friends want to settle into them. The Great Borough is a splendid place, don't you think? I'm sure there can't be many warrens where all the rabbits can meet together underground. The roof's all tree roots, you know, and of course the tree outside keeps the rain from coming through. It's a wonder the tree's alive, but it is." Hazel suspected that Strawberry's talking had the real purpose of preventing his own questions. He was partly irritated and partly mystified. "Never mind," he thought. "If we all get as big as these chaps, we shall do pretty well. There must be some good food round here somewhere. His doe's a beautiful creature, too. Perhaps there are some more like her in the warren." Strawberry moved out of the burrow, and Hazel followed him into another run, leading deeper down below the wood. It was certainly a warren to admire. Sometimes when they crossed a run that led upward to a hole, you could hear the rain outside, still falling in the night. But although it had now been raining for several hours, there was not the least bit damp or cold either in deep runs or in the many burrows that they passed. Both the drainage and the ventilation were better than he had been accustomed to. Here and there other rabbits were on the move. Once they came upon Acorn, who was evidently being taken on a tour of the very same kind. "Very friendly, aren't they?" he said to Hazel as they passed one another. "I never dreamed we'd reach a place like this. You've got wonderful judgment, Hazel." Strawberry waited politely for him to finish speaking, and Hazel could not help feeling pleased that he must have heard. At last, after skirting carefully round some openings from which there was a distinct smell of rats, they halted in some kind of pit. A steep tunnel led up into the air. Rabbit runs tend to be bow-shaped, but this was straight, so that above them, through the mouth of the hole, Hazel could see leaves against the night sky. He realized that one wall of the pit was convex and made of some hard substance. He sniffed at it uncertainly. "Don't you know what those are?" said Strawberry. "They're bricks, the stones that men make their houses and barns out of. There used to be a well here long ago, but it's filled up now. The men don't use it anymore. That's the outer side of the well shaft, and this earth wall here is completely flat because of some man thing fixed behind it in the ground, but I'm not sure what." "There's something stuck on it," said Hazel. "Why, there's stones pushed into the surface. But what for?" "Do you like it?" asked Strawberry. Hazel puzzled over the stones. They were all the same size and pushed at regular intervals into the soil. He could make nothing of them. "What are they for?" he asked again. "It's Ella-Ray-Ra," said Strawberry. "A rabbit called Laburnum did it, some time ago now, We have others, but this is the best. Worth a visit, don't you think? Hazel was more at a loss than ever. He had never seen a laburnum and was puzzled by the name, which in Latin means poison tree. How could a rabbit be called poison? And how could stones be Ellery Raw? What exactly was it that Strawberry was saying was Ellery Raw? In confusion, he said, I don't understand. It's what we call a shape, explained Strawberry. Haven't you seen one before? The stones make the shape of Ellery Raw on the wall, stealing the king's lettuce, you know. Hazel had not felt so much bewildered since Blackberry had talked about the raft beside the Enborn. Obviously, the stones could not possibly be anything to do with Ellery Raw. It seemed to him that Strawberry might as well have said that his tail was an oak tree. He sniffed again and then put a paw up to the wall. Steady, steady, said Strawberry. You might damage it, and that wouldn't do. Well, never mind. We'll come again some other time. But where Hazel was beginning when Strawberry once more interrupted him. I expect you'll be hungry now. I know I am. It's going on raining all night. I'm certain of that. But we can feed underground here, you know. And then you can sleep in the great Borough or in my place if you prefer. We can go back more quickly than we came. There's a run that goes almost straight. Actually, it passes across. He chatted on relentlessly, and they made their way back. It suddenly occurred to Hazel that these desperate interruptions seemed to follow any question beginning, where? He thought he would put this to the proof. After a while, Strawberry ended it by saying, We're nearly at the great Borough now, but we're coming in by a different way. And where? said Hazel. Instantly, Strawberry turned into a side rung and called, Kingcup, are you coming down to the great Borough? There was silence. That's odd, said Strawberry, returning and once more leading the way. He's generally there about this time. I often call for him, you know. Hazel, hanging back, made a quick search with nose and whiskers. The threshold of the Borough was covered with a day-old fall of soft soil from the roof above. Strawberry's prints had marked it plainly, and there were no others whatsoever. Chapter 14. Like trees in November. The great Borough was less crowded than when they had left it. Narration was the first rabbit they met. She was among a group of 3 or 4 fine does who were talking quietly together and seemed to be feeding as well. There was a smell of green stuff. Evidently some kind of food was available underground, like the Furrows lettuce. Hazel stopped to speak to Narration. She asked whether he had gone as far as the well pit and the Ellery Raw of laburnum. Yes, we did, said Hazel. It's something quite strange to me, I'm afraid, but I rather admire you and your friends than stones on a wall. As he said this, he noticed that Cowslip had joined them and that Strawberry was talking to him quietly. He caught the words, never been near a shape, and a moment later Cowslip replied, Well, it makes no difference from our point of view. Hazel suddenly felt tired and depressed. He heard Blackberry behind Cowslip's sleek, heavy shoulder and brought across to him. Come out into the grass, he said quietly. Bring anyone else who will come. At that moment, Cowslip turned to him and said, You'll be glad of something to eat now. I'll show you what we've got down here. 1 or 2 of us are just going to souffle, said Hazel. Oh, it's still raining much too hard for that, said Cowslip, as though there could be no 2 ways about it. We'll feed you here. I should be sorry to quarrel over it, said Hazel warmly, but some of us need to souffle. We're used to it, and rain doesn't bother us. Cowslip seemed taken aback for a moment. Then he laughed. The phenomenon of laughter is unknown to animals, though it is possible that dogs and elephants may have some inkling of it. The effect on Hazel and Blackberry was overwhelming. Hazel's first idea was how Cowslip was showing the symptom of some kind of disease. Blackberry clearly thought that he might be going to attack them and backed away. Cowslip said nothing, but his eerie laughter continued. Hazel and Blackberry turned and scuttled up the nearest run as though he had been a ferret. Halfway up they met Pipkin, who was small enough first to let them pass and then to turn round to follow them. The rain was still falling steadily. The night was dark and, for May, cold. They all three hunched themselves in the grass and nibbled while the rain ran off their fur in streams. "My goodness, Hazel," said Blackberry. "Did you really want to still play? This is terrible. I was just going to eat whatever it is they have and then go to sleep. What's the idea?" "I don't know," replied Hazel. "I suddenly felt like I had to get out and I wanted your company. I can see what's troubling Fibre, though he'll get over it, I dare say. There is something strange about these rabbits. Do you know they push stones into the wall?" "They do what?" Hazel explained. Blackberry was as much of a loss as he had been himself. "But I'll tell you another thing," he said. "Bigwig wasn't so far wrong. They do sing like the birds. I was in a burrow belonging to a rabbit called Bethany. His doe has a litter, and she was making a noise over them rather like a robin in autumn. To send them to sleep, she said. It made me feel queer, I can tell you." "And what do you think of them, Learu?" asked Hazel. "They're very nice and kind," answered Pipkin, "but I'll tell you how they strike me. They all seem terribly sad. I can't think why when they're so big and strong and have this beautiful warren. But they put me in mind of trees in November. I expect I'm being silly, though, Hazel. You brought us here, and I'm sure it must be a fine, safe place." "No, you're not being silly. I hadn't realized it, but you're perfectly right. They all seem to have something on their minds." "But after all," said Blackberry, "we don't know why there are so few. They don't fill the warren anything like. Perhaps they've had some sort of trouble that's left them sad. We don't know because they don't tell us. But if we're going to stay here, we've got to learn to get on with them. We can't fight them. They're too big. And we don't want them fighting us." "I don't believe they can fight, Hazel," said Pipkin. "Although they're so big, they don't seem like fighters to me. Not like Bigwig and Silver." "You notice a lot, don't you, Learu?" said Hazel. "Do you notice it's raining harder than ever? I've got enough grass in my stomach for a bit. We'll go down again now, and let's keep to ourselves for a while." "Why not sleep?" said Blackberry. "It's over night and day now, and I'm dropping." They returned down a different hole and soon found a dry, empty burrow, where they curled up together and slept in the warmth of their own tired bodies. When Hazel woke, he perceived at once that it was morning. Some time after sunrise, by the smell of it, the scent of apple blossom was plain enough. Then he picked up the fainter smells of buttercups and horses. Mingled with these came another. Although it made him uneasy, he could not tell for some moments what it was. A dangerous smell, an unpleasant smell, a totally unnatural smell, quite close outside. A smoke smell. Something was burning. Then he remembered how Bigwig, after his reconnaissance on the previous day, had spoken of the little white sticks in the grass. That was it. A man had been walking over the ground outside. That must have been what had awakened him. Hazel lay in the warm, dark burrow with a delightful sense of security. He could smell the man could not smell him. All the man could smell was the nasty smoke he was making. He fell to thinking of the shape in the well pit, and then dropped into a drowsy half-dream in which Ross said that it was all a trick of his to disguise himself as Poison Tree and put the stones in the wall to engage Strawberry's attention while he himself was getting acquainted with Nilderhane. Pipkin stirred and turned in his sleep, murmuring, "Is groundsel nice, mother?" And Hazel, touched to think that he must be dreaming of old days, rolled over on his side to give him room to settle again. At that moment, however, he heard a rabbit approaching down some run close by. Whoever it was, he was calling and stamping as well, Hazel noticed, in an unnatural way. The sound, as Blackberry had said, was not unlike birdsong. As he came closer, Hazel could distinguish the word. "Flayra! Flayra!" The voice was Strawberry's. Pipkin and Blackberry were waking, more at the stamping than the voice, which was thin and novel, not striking through their sleep to any deep instinct. Hazel slipped out of the burrow into the run, and at once came upon Strawberry busily thumping a hind leg on the hard earth floor. "My mother used to say if you were a horse the ceiling would fall down," said Hazel. "Why do you stamp underground?" "To wake everyone," answered Strawberry. "The rain went on nearly all night, you know. We generally sleep right through the early morning if it's rough weather, but it's turned fine now." "Why actually wake everybody, though?" "Well, the man's gone by, and Cowslip and I thought the flayra ought not to lie about for long. If we don't go and get it, the rats and rooks come, and I don't like fighting rats. I expect it's all in a day's work for an adventurous lot like you." "I don't understand." "Well, come along with me. I'm just going back along this run for Nilderhane. We haven't got a litter at present, you see, so she'll come out with the rest of us." Other rabbits were making their way along the run, and Strawberry spoke to several of them, more than once remarking that he would enjoy taking their new friends across the field. Hazel began to realize that he liked Strawberry. On the previous day he had been too tired and bewildered to size him up, but now that he had had a good sleep, he could see that Strawberry was really a harmless, decent sort of fellow. He was touchingly devoted to the beautiful Nilderhane, and he evidently had moods of gaiety and a great capacity for enjoyment. As they came up into the May morning, he hopped over the ditch and skipped into the long grass as blithe as a squirrel. He seemed quite to have lost the preoccupied air that had troubled Hazel the night before. Hazel himself paused in the mouth of the hole, as he always had behind the bramble curtain at home, and looked out across the valley. The sun, risen behind the copse, threw long shadows from the trees southwestward across the field. The wet grass glittered, and nearby a nut tree sparkled irresident, winking and gleaming as its branches moved in the light wind. The brook was swollen, and Hazel's ears could distinguish the deeper, smoother sound changed since the day before. Between the copse and the brook, the slope was covered with pale lilac ladies' smocks, each standing separately in the grass, a frail stalk of bloom above a spread of cressy leaves. The breeze dropped, and the little valley lay completely still, held in long beams of light and enclosed on either side by the lines of the woods. Upon this clear stillness, like feathers on the surface of a pool, fell the calling of a cuckoo. "It's quite safe, Hazel," said Cowslip behind him in the hole. "I know you're used to taking a good look round when you seal flay, but here we generally go straight out." Hazel did not mean to alter his ways or take instructions from Cowslip. However, no one had pushed him, and there was no point in bickering over trifles. He hopped across the ditch to the further bank and looked round him again. Several rabbits were already running down the field toward a distant hedge dappled white with great patches of May bloom. He saw Bigwig and Silver and went to join them, flicking the wet off his front paws step by step like a cat. "I hope your friends have been looking after you as well as these fellows have looked after us, Hazel," said Bigwig. "Silver and I really feel at home again. If you ask me, I reckon we've all made a big change for the better. Even if Fibre's wrong and nothing terrible has happened to the old warren, I'd still say we're better off here. Are you coming along to feed?" "What is this business about going to feed, do you know?" asked Hazel. "Haven't they told you? Apparently there's flera to be had down the fields. Most of them go every day." Rabbits usually eat grass, as everyone knows, but more appetizing food, lettuce or carrots, for which they will make an expedition or rob a garden, is flera. "Flera? But isn't it rather late in the morning to raid a garden?" said Hazel, glancing at the distant roofs of the farm behind the trees. "No, no," said one of the Warren rabbits, who had overheard him. "The Frela's left in the field, usually near the place where the brook rises. We either eat it there or bring it back, or both. But we'll have to bring some back today. The rain was so bad last night that no one went out, and we ate almost everything in the warren." The brook ran through the hedgerow, and there was a cattle wade in the gap. After the rain, the edges were a swamp, with water standing in every hoofprint. The rabbits gave them a wide berth and came through by another gap further up, close to the gnarled trunk of an old crabapple tree. Beyond, surrounding a thicket of rushes, stood an enclosure of posts and rails half as high as a man. Inside it, the kingcups bloomed and the brook whelmed up from its source. On the pasture nearby, Hazel could see scattered russet and orange-colored fragments, some with feathery light green foliage showing up against the darker grass. They gave a pungent, horsey smell as if freshly cut. It attracted him. He began to salivate and stopped to pass Raka. Cowslip, coming up nearby, turned toward him with his unnatural smile. But now Hazel, in his eagerness, paid no attention. Powerfully drawn, he ran out of the hedgerow toward the scattered ground. He came to one of the fragments, sniffed it, and tasted it. It was carrot. Hazel had eaten various roots in his life, but only once before had he tasted carrot, when a cart horse had spilled a nosebag near the home warren. These were old carrots, some half eaten already by mice or fly. But to the rabbits they were redolent with luxury, a feast to drive all other feelings out of mind. Hazel sat nibbling and biting, the rich, full taste of the cultivated roots filling him with a wave of pleasure. He hopped about the grass, gnawing one piece after another, eating the green tops along with the slices. No one interrupted him. There seemed to be plenty for all. From time to time, instinctively, he looked up and sniffed the wind, but his caution was half-hearted. "If they'll come, let them," he thought. "I'll fight the lot. I couldn't run anyway. What a country! What a warren! No wonder they're all as big as hares and smell like princes. Hello, Pipkin, fill yourself up to the ears. No more shivering on the banks of the streams for you, old chap." "You won't know how to shiver in a week or two," said Hawkbit, with his mouth full. "I feel so much better for this. I'd follow you anywhere, Hazel. I wasn't myself in the heather that night. It's bad when you know you can't get underground. I hope you understand." "It's all forgotten," answered Hazel. "I'd better ask Cowslip what we're supposed to do about taking some of this stuff back to the warren." He found Cowslip near the spring. He had evidently finished feeding and was washing his face with his front paws. "Are there roots here every day?" asked Hazel. Where? He checked himself just in time. I'm learning, he thought. Not always, Roots, replied Cowslip. These are last year's, as you'll have noticed. I suppose the remains are being cleared out. It may be anything, roots, green stuff, old apples. It all depends. Sometimes there's nothing at all, especially in good summer weather. But in hard weather in winter, there's nearly always something. Big roots, usually, or kale, or sometimes corn. We eat that too, you know. Food's no problem, then. The whole place ought to be full of rabbits. I suppose if you really have finished, interrupted Cowslip, and there's no hurry, do take your time. You could try carrying. It's easy with these roots, easier than anything except lettuce. You simply bite onto one, take it back to the warren, and put it in the great burrow. I generally take 2 at a time, but then I've had a lot of practice. Rabbits don't usually carry food, I know, but you'll learn. It's useful to have a store. The does need some for their young when they're getting bigger, and it's particularly convenient for all of us in bad weather. Come back with me, and I'll help you if you find the carrying difficult at first. It took Hazel some trouble to learn to grip half a carrot in his mouth and carry it, like a dog, across the field and back to the warren. He had to put it down several times, but Cowslip was encouraging, and he was determined to keep up his position as the resourceful leader of the newcomers. At his suggestion, they both waited at the mouth of one of the larger holes to see how his companions were shaping. They all seemed to be making an effort and doing their best, although the smaller rabbits, especially Pipkin, clearly found the task an awkward one. Cheer up, Pipkin, said Hazel. Think how much you'll enjoy eating it tonight. Anyway, I'm sure Fibre must find it as hard as you. He's just as small. I don't know where he is, said Pipkin. Have you seen him? Now that Hazel thought about it, he had not. He became a little anxious and, as he returned across the field with Cowslip, did his best to explain something of Fibre's peculiar temperament. I do hope he's all right, he said. I think perhaps I'll go look for him when we've carried this next lot. Have you any idea where he might be? He waited for Cowslip to reply, but he was disappointed. After a few moments, Cowslip said, Look, do you see those jackdaws hanging around the carrots? They've been a nuisance for several days now. I must get someone to try and keep them off until we finish carrying. But they're really too big for a rabbit to tackle. Now, sparrows, what's that got to do with Fibre? Asked Hazel sharply. In fact, said Cowslip, breaking into a run, I'll go myself. But he did not engage the jackdaws, and Hazel saw him pick up another carrot and start back with it. Annoyed, he joined Buckthorn and Dandelion, and the 3 of them returned together. As they came up to the warren bank, he suddenly caught sight of Fibre. He was sitting, half concealed under the low spread of a yew tree on the edge of the copse, some way from the holes of the warren. Putting down his carrot, Hazel ran across, scrambled up the bank, and joined him on the bare ground under the low, close boughs. Fibre said nothing and continued to stare over the field. Aren't you coming to learn to carry, Fibre? Asked Hazel at length. It's not too difficult once you get the hang of it. I'll have nothing to do with it, answered Fibre in a low voice. Dogs. You're like dogs carrying sticks. Fibre, are you trying to make me angry? I'm not going to get angry because you call me stupid names, but you're letting the others do all the work. I'm the one who ought to get angry, said Fibre, but I'm no good at it. That's the trouble. Why should they listen to me? Half of them think I'm mad. You're to blame, Hazel, because you know I'm not, and still you won't listen. So you don't like this warren any better even now? Well, I think you're wrong. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Why shouldn't you make a mistake, like everybody else? Hogpit was wrong in the heather, and you're wrong now. Those are rabbits down there, trotting along like a lot of squirrels with nuts. How can that be right? Well, I'd say they've copied a good idea from the squirrels, and that makes them better rabbits. Do you suppose the man, whoever he is, puts the roots out there because he has a kind heart? What's he up to? He's just throwing away rubbish. How many rabbits have had a good meal off of men's rubbish heaps? Shot lettuces, old turnips. You know we all do, when we can. It's not poison fibre, I can tell you that. And if he wanted to shoot rabbits, he's had plenty of chances this morning, but he hasn't done it. Fibre seemed to grow even smaller as he flattened himself on the hard earth. I'm a fool to try to argue, he said miserably. Hazel, dear old Hazel, it's simply that I know there's something unnatural and evil twisted all round this place. I don't know what it is, so no wonder I can't talk about it. I keep getting near it, though. You know how you poke your nose against a wire netting and push it up against the apple tree, but you still can't bite the bark because of the wire? I'm close to this, whatever it is, but I can't grip it. If I sit here alone, I may reach it yet. Fibre, why not do as I say? Have a meal on those roots and then go underground and sleep. You'll feel all the better for it. I'll tell you, I'll have nothing to do with the place, said Fibre. As for going underground, I'd rather go over the heather. The roof of that hall is made of bones. No, tree roots. But after all, you were underground all night. I wasn't, said Fibre. What? Where were you then? Here. All night? Yes. A yew tree gives good shelter, you know. Hazel was now seriously worried. If Fibre's horrors have kept him above ground all night in the rain, oblivious of cold and prowling Ezel, then clearly it was not going to be easy to talk him out of it. He was silent for some time. At last he said, What a shame. I still think you'd do better to come join us, but I'll let you alone now and come and see how you're feeling later. Don't go eating the yew tree either. Fibre made no reply, and Hazel went back to the field. The day was certainly not one to encourage foreboding. By knee-breadth it was so hot that the lower part of the field was humid. The air was heavy with thick herbal smells, as though it were already late June. The water, mint and marjoram, not yet flowering, gave off scent from their leaves, and here and there an early meadow sweet stood in bloom. The chiff-chaff was busy all morning, high in a silver birch near the abandoned holes across the dip. And from deep in the copse, somewhere by the discussed well, came the beautiful song of the blackcap. By early afternoon there was a stillness of heat, and a herd of cows from the higher fields slowly grazed their way down into the shade. Only a few of the rabbits remained above ground. Almost all were asleep in the burrows, but still Fibre sat alone under the yew tree. In the early evening, Hazel sought out Bigwig, and together they ventured into the copse behind the warren. At first they moved cautiously, but before long they grew confident in finding no trace of any creature larger than a mouse. There's nothing to smell, said Bigwig, and no tracks. I think Cowslips told us no more than the truth. There really aren't any Ezel here, different from that wood where we crossed the river. I don't mind telling you, Ezel, I was scared stiff that night, but I wasn't going to show it. So was I, answered Hazel. But I agree with you about this place. It seems completely clear. This is odd, though, interrupted Bigwig. He was in a clump of brambles, in the middle of which was a rabbit hole that led up from one of the warm passages below. The ground was soft and damp, with old leaves thick in the mold. Where Bigwig had stopped, there were signs of commotion. The rotten leaves had been thrown up in showers. Some were hanging on the brambles, and a few flat, wet clots were lying well out in the open ground beyond the clump. In the center, the earth had been laid bare and was scored with long scratches and furrows, and there was a narrow, regular hole about the same size as one of the carrots they had carried that morning. The two rabbits sniffed and stared, but could make nothing of it. "The funny thing is, there's no smell," said Bigwig. "No, only rabbit, and that's everywhere, of course. And man, that's everywhere too. But that smell might very well have nothing to do with it. All it tells us is that a man walked through the wood and threw a white stick down. It wasn't a man that tore up this ground. Well, these mad rabbits probably dance in the moonlight or something." "I wouldn't be surprised," said Hazel. "It would be just like them. Let's ask Cowslip." "That's the only silly thing you've said so far. Tell me, since we came here, has Cowslip answered any question you've asked him?" "Well, no, not many." "Try asking him where he danced in the moonlight. Say, 'Cowslip, where?'" "Oh, you've noticed that too, have you? He won't answer where anything. Neither will Strawberry. I think they may be nervous of us. Pipkin was right when he said they weren't fighters. So they're keeping up a mystery to stay even with us. It's best just to put up with it. We don't want to upset them, and it's bound to smooth itself out in time." "There's more rain coming tonight," said Bigwig. "Soon, too, I think. Let's go underground and see if we can get them to talk a bit more freely." "I think that's something we can only wait for, but I agree about going underground now. And for goodness sake, let's get Fibre to come with us. He troubles me. Do you know he was out all night in the rain?" As they went back through the copse, Hazel recounted his talk with Fibre that morning. They found him under the yew tree, and after a rather stormy scene, during which Bigwig grew rough and impatient, he was bullied rather than persuaded into going down with them into the great Borough. It was crowded, and as the rain began to fall, more rabbits came down the runs. They pushed about, cheerful and shattering. The carrots which had been brought in were eaten between friends or carried away to Doze and families and Boroughs all over the warren. But when they were finished, the hall remained full. It was pleasantly warm with the heat of so many bodies. Gradually the talkative groups settled into a contented silence, but no one seemed disposed to go to sleep. Rabbits are lively at nightfall, and when evening rain drives them underground, they still feel gregarious. Hazel noticed that almost all his companions seemed to have become friendly with the warren rabbits. Also, he found that whenever he moved into one group or another, the warren rabbits evidently knew who he was and treated him as the leader of the newcomers. He could not find Strawberry, but after a time Cowslip came up to him from the other end of the hall. "I'm glad you're here, Hazel," he said. "Some of our lot are suggesting a story from somebody. We're hoping one of your people would like to tell one, but we can begin ourselves if you prefer." There was a rabbit saying, "In the warren, more stories than passages, and a rabbit can no more refuse to tell a story than an Irishman can refuse to fight." Hazel and his friends conferred. After a short time, Blackberry announced, "We've asked Hazel to tell you about our adventures, how we made our journey here, and had the good luck to join you." There was an uncomfortable silence, broken only by shuffling and whispering. Blackberry, dismayed, turned back to Hazel and Bigwig. "What's the matter?" he asked in a low voice. "Surely there's no harm in that." "Wait," replied Hazel. "Let them tell us if they don't like it. They have their own ways here." However, the silence continued for some time, as though the other rabbits did not care to mention what they thought was wrong. It's no good, said Blackberry at last. You'll have to say something yourself, Hazel. No, why should you? I'll do it. He spoke up again. On second thoughts, Hazel remembers that we have a good storyteller among us. Dandelion will tell you a story of Elorera. That can't go wrong anyway, he whispered. Which one, though? Said Dandelion. Hazel remembered the stones by the well pit. The king's lettuce, he answered. They think a lot of that, I believe. Dandelion took up his cue with the same plucky readiness that he had shown in the wood. I'll tell the story of the king's lettuce, he said aloud. We shall enjoy that, replied Cowslip immediately. He'd better, muttered Bigwig. Dandelion began.